Okay, welcome everyone to the Soul Path Wisdom community. This is our Friday class, and today we're going to talk about practical evolutionary astrology. Or, as I'm coming into it today, I know many of you know about evolutionary astrology, at least to some degree, and we look at a lot of charts, and I know I often go through the charts fairly quickly for some of you who have not been studying as in depth with me. But today, by focusing just on the basics of the lunar nodes and the planets that are joined to them, aspecting them, or ruling them, I'm hoping that you can get kind of a baseline grounding in the key concept of who is this person, why are they here? And so we're going to break it down a little bit and look at a few charts. And I believe we'll have time to maybe look at a couple of charts of people who are here for the class today as well. So the bottom line of evolutionary astrology is looking at the lunar nodes to discern who a person is on a soul level and what their evolutionary path is. We can assume that we all die in between each incarnation, and we bring in the karma that is ripening at this point in time. And we can consider karma good, bad, and indifferent. Karma is nothing more than unresolved energy from prior times. It doesn't have to be just from the very last life, it can be from any life a long time ago. It's normally, I think, a combination of lives, a pattern of lives. Feel that we do our lives in kind of a curriculum format where we're working on a particular experience and we're repeating it again and again and getting better and better at it until we have resolved it. But nevertheless, the South Node, the lunar South Node, represents the gifts and challenges we're bringing in. It is core to you. I think of the South Node as significant an indicator of who a person is as their sun sign. And with both, and we forget this sometimes, with both, there is a process where we're likely to embody some of the more negative or shadowy, dysfunctional qualities of the sun, of the South Node in the first part of life. And then as we go on, we move through a more medium level of expression, healthy but not, scintillating, evolved. And ideally, we come to the point that we're working with that sign in its most evolved way. That's why when I give you a list of qualities of any planet or any sign, I will give it to you with the high, the sort of the goal state, the mediocre, and then the less evolved, so that you can keep training your sights on what it is that you're going for, what that ultimate gift is. So sometimes, because there's a lot of emphasis on what is the negative habit pattern of the South Node, we can forget that there are also a lot of gifts with the South Node and that it's core to our personality, it's core to our operating system. And because we are more or less binary in orientation as humans, and we like to think of things as good, bad, and wrong, right, let this go, focus on that. We When we first hear about evolutionary and the nodal structure, we can get into an automatic process of feeling that the South Node is fundamentally bad and we have to get away from it and we have to do our North Node. And I'll have people who are still relatively young coming in and feeling kind of guilty and like it's a problem that they feel like they can't get away from their South Node. And to some degree in our whole life, I would say we never get away from our South Node. It is the emblem of who we've been for so many lives, and it does contain these many gifts. And the gifts are meant to be shared. The gifts are often a significant grounded part of what our career is, or the qualities that we give to friends and family that we're known for. So we don't want to just throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to recognize that we have these gifts. We want to give them away in some way, and we want to be right-sized about it. And we must be very aware of the challenges. So the challenges are the karmic habit patterns. They are the negative qualities of that sign, and they indicate a pattern, almost kind of a fundamental laziness, indoctrinated, habituated group of qualities. Sometimes we can think that there's just one that's the most obvious, but there will be several related qualities that are part of that South Node that we keep working with. And the older we get, the more it feels tired and old. And we just don't enjoy it as much anymore. It's not, there's not a sense of growth and excitement and challenge and evolution in it. It's just doing the same thing over and over again. It feels complete. So that's just the sign of the South Node. And then we have the North Node, the sign exactly opposite. And we look at it in two ways. We start out by considering that the qualities of that sign are things or people or situations that blocked us. And we have to understand that we still are attuned to bringing those blockages in again in this life. And it also, when we think about the positive qualities of that sign, this relates to the qualities that we're meant to develop for our evolutionary path of growth. And we think of these qualities as medicine. So they are opposite to the qualities of the South Node. They are sometimes called a polarity point, the sign is opposite a sign that we're considering. And these qualities, when we try to work with them, when we intend to develop them, we make choices, even though it's uncomfortable and difficult. When we do that, slowly we begin to grow. And then we get to the point that the positive qualities of the North Node and the positive qualities of the South Node work together with as much harmonious balance as possible. And we're meant to have awareness of when we're just floating in the middle range, or especially when we have become stressed and we've fallen into the old habit patterns. Now, you might think that maybe a person could fall into negative habit patterns of the North Node, and technically that's possible, but you don't see it too much. People are sort of floundering around with the North Node qualities enough that there is a tendency that most of the qualities can provide a little bit of balance and healing and evolution to the South Node patterning. Then we have the planets that are conjunct the South Node, so right nearby, or the North Node. And this gives us more information, and especially on an archetypal level. Like when you think of each planet can possibly represent a person or a type of person, then we understand that to be, for instance, with planets conjunct the South Node, this represents uh, people that, well, first of all, who we were, a little bit greater definition of who we were, but also the kind of people that were around us. And planets at the North Node level represent who was against us, what type of person, but also who will be our regular allies as we move forward. So, to give us an example, let's say Mercury. So if Mercury is conjunct the South Node, and Mercury represents young people, writers, teachers, we could say that we were a young writer and teacher in prior lives, and young writers and teachers were around us. If we then say Saturn is conjunct the North Node, this is the type of person that was against us. We could say Saturn is an older person, a father, a person who's aligned with the patriarchy, someone who's an authority. So we had, some sense of an authority with strong rules that was working against us. If you imagine that you were a writer, the Mercury conjunct the South Node, and you wanted to get published, but those in charge didn't like what you were writing and didn't respect you, and you felt a great deal of criticism, then that is a way to see that Saturn at the North Node level and how it worked against you, as well as the way that it continues to work against you in your own mind, where you continue to imagine that you're going to be blocked by those in authority. And the inner critic energy is super strong because of that Saturn in that position. And if we then look at planets that rule the sign of the South or the North Node, and I think most will know that, but for instance, that Saturn rules Capricorn. So if you have a Capricorn South Node, we're going to look for where is Saturn so that we know another piece of data, another nuance that tells us a little bit more about where we were. So we're not just looking at the house position of the nodes, which says where we're operating. Now we see that the planet that is ruling a node gives us another piece of information about, where we are operating from, where we're either getting blockages and resistance from the North Node ruling planet, or where we are feeling aligned and in tune with the planet and the house, the sign that it's in, all in some other area. So we get this deepening story, this deepening plot line. And we can even go into the planets that aspect the nodes. The most important one, of course, is the square, the 90 degrees, because this represents a blockage that was not as hardcore as the blockage of the North Node, but a blockage nevertheless that we couldn't get past, but we could have gotten past if we had enough time, maturity, or resources. So this becomes a very important part of how we're going to work our way through the whole nodal challenge, and understanding that the planets or angles that square the lunar nodes are part of a system of unpacking these old patterns, and are part of like steps toward evolution, will help us come up with a practical approach of what we're going to recommend to ourselves or to clients, what we're going to recommend as the places to focus in a co-creative way, so that we understand this evolutionary path in a way that is practical, that in a way that is grounded and stable, and also in a way that we see it as a path that unfolds over the whole life, that we let go a little bit of the impatience and the feeling that we must get it right and get it right, immediately, but to know that any life choice or life experience that we're facing is in some way connected to this pathway. As I'm talking about it right now, I'm thinking about it kind of like a board game. We think about Monopoly. We're going around, we throw the dice, and we get to go a few spots, and we land on the railroad, or we land on some other thing, and we get a card, and then we see where we go next. There's a way that the lunar nodes and the planets that rule them and are connected to them and aspect them, that this is this game board where we can say, okay, I'm here. I'm South Node, and my ruling planet is here nearby, and I'm going to make a new choice, and I may get stuck at the what's called the skip step or the integrative step, the square. I'm going to be faced with that blockage yet again, and I'm going to have to figure out a way to integrate that energy so I can move on. And then you're going to get to the goal state. You're going to get to the North Node. And you're going to say, what choice would I make right now that would be in alignment with that North Node? Usually something that feels deeply uncomfortable and hard to maneuver, hard to manage. The North Node feels like not us. It is often projected as its more negative qualities. So here we are, sort of trying on this mantle, trying on a costume. It doesn't feel quite right for us, but nevertheless, we have to figure out a way to do it. Now, we're not just going to stay there in this board game. Another experience is going to come up just when we're thinking, oh, I'm doing pretty well, and I'm starting to live from the place of my North Node. And then something happens, and we find ourselves totally in our South Node again. And our whole mental state and our way of processing is related to these old patterns. And then we have to find, well, what's the next thing that's happening? Of course, if we get really into the depths of all of this, we'll be thinking about transits and progressions and other predictive techniques that tell us about the unfolding of time. So we'll know, this skip step place is being activated right now by a Saturn transit or a Pluto transit. So I know that this is the place that my evolutionary path is focusing on now. So when we're talking about this whole nodal structure, first and foremost, I want you to think about it as an underlying operating system, a system that is a key aspect of your personality, your psychology, your unconscious motivations. And you don't even have to think about past lives with this way of looking at it. You can just think of it as this is the deepest level of who this person is, and the sun sign nests on top of it. The sun, the moon, and the rising are three aspects of personality. Important, absolutely important, but they are here in service of this evolutionary path. That's what is, I feel like, a fundamental difference between a more typical type of astrology and the evolutionary, is that we're giving these lunar nodes a lot more power and a lot more, hmm, I'm trying to think of a good word for this, zest. Like, it's the lunar node story and how it reflects in our personalities is so much an integrated part of us that to not recognize it for what it is and for the habit patterns and personality constructs, to not recognize it and to just go straight to the sun, moon, and rising, leave something out. I've noticed it recently. I was reviewing a lot of chart analyses, and I noticed again and again that when the lunar nodes are not configured in to the answers of, who is this person, and how do they operate when it feels flat to me. It feels flat to just say the sun, moon, and rising aspects and personality constructs. The nodes bring in something that is deep and powerful and kind of it explains things. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense when you think about it. Now, if you want, you can also create a historical metaphor story, and that can be a way to understand the pattern in a way that seems less personal. Because sometimes people, well, as humans, we love stories, right? We enjoy stories. But I think it's important that we don't believe that every time we create a historical story about an astrology chart, that for sure that person had that life at that point in time. These, our lives are nested. Again, they're repetitive. We do the same kinds of things again and again in different historical times, in different cultures, in different families. We are not just incarnating in one country through the family line again and again, as some people tend to believe. So we can create a story, and that can help us understand in uh, a way that unfolds unconscious picture energies, and the psyche shifts and changes through images, through archetypes. And that can be very healing to have a story, but it's not necessary. What I think is most important here is that we see the lunar node story as a life path guide, and that we start to think of it as, because sometimes people will say, oh, I just wish I had a guidebook for my life. I feel like I'm floundering. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Well, when you slowly and methodically unpack your karmic story according to these techniques, and of course, I know in today's class we're just on the surface of this, but when you unpack these techniques and this way of looking at things, you have a guide, and you know what you're aiming for, and you also know when you're aiming for it. Now, here's our first chart. I'm going to do two charts of famous people. I'm going to do my best to work at them very slowly and methodically and make sure we cover these pieces in order, okay? It's very hard for me because I see things and I jump around. This is my kind of global way of being. But to be practical, we need to slow it down, and we need to be organized. So Georgia O'Keeffe, as many of you know, was very, very gifted artist. She did a lot of paintings that were sort of up close in flowers, the interior of flowers. And, she was also a pretty dynamic, wild woman, who left New York, ended up out in Taos, New Mexico, where I lived for many years. And in the later years of her life, had a companion, a male companion who was almost 60 years younger than her, that she really enjoyed spending time with, and she left him all her money, much to her family's upset. But she was unique. She was unique as a person. She was unique as an artist. Now, when we start with her, and we start with her South Node. And I think I got my little annotator out here. Okay. So we're going to start with the South Node. And we see that it is in Aquarius in the third house. So the sign Aquarius on a past life level indicates that you're coming in from lives where you have been unique, out of the box, maybe a revolutionary, a rebel, uh, definitely in connection with high mind ideals. And this is what comes in on the archetypal level is that this is a person who marches to their own drummer, a person who's used to being outside of things, either rejected or rejecting, and a person who channels, a person who has instantaneous ideas that may be very, very changeable. There's a lot of gifts in this. There's a brilliance to be given, an ability to invent things, and so bringing new ideas. And she brought many new ideas to the field of painting in the way that she did it. She was a first. That would be the higher level of the South Node in Aquarius. But what would be the habit pattern? What would be the challenge that we would be attuned to? Well, this is a very intellectual sign. It's an air sign. It's a sign of the mind. So the first thing we can see is people with South Node in Aquarius might detach from their own true needs. They might rationalize things. They might stay in their head. And I do see this quite often. I see this ability, which in some ways is quite a talent, to let go of personal needs, to be a little bit more impersonal. This done to an excess leaves you wanting, leaves you feeling, like you're just giving to everybody else, and there's no self built into the equation in a positive way. Third house, its location, is whatever is happening in Aquarian way for her is happening in the third house of the mind, communication, writing, speaking, teaching, maybe something to do with siblings, maybe something to do with neighbors in the neighborhood. So these are all the places that we imagine the Aquarian energy might play out for her in different ways. Now, there are no planets that are conjunct the South Node. So we look to the ruler of the South Node for the next piece of information. And we go to the modern ruler first and the traditional ruler second, if there is one. So we see here that the modern ruler of Aquarius is Uranus. And Uranus in Libra tells us more about who she was in prior lives. In the 11th house, too. We'll add that piece. So Uranus represents the part of us that seeks to be unique, different, awakened, to be someone who is authentic and free. And in the sign of Libra is doing it in a way of harmony, peace, balance, beauty, or can also be in relationship. So somebody who's rebelling about relationship or rebelling in a way that is filled with art, rebelling in a way that is um, also, trying to be nice about it a little bit. This could be some of the ways that we'd be starting to think about this. And, we can't ignore the fact that it's conjunct Venus in Libra that rules it. So that adds a lot of extra emphasis to the relational quality of this person from a soul perspective, what they're coming in with. And in the 11th house is going to be someone who is part of their greater community, part of humanity, reaching out to be seen. But there's often and again, we're thinking about the negativities here. There is often kind of a negative aspect to Venus and Libra energies when they are in the 11th house, where there's a requirement to accommodate and to fit in with polite society. Basically, Venus in Libra in the 11th house wants to be a nice girl, a good woman. And especially in this time frame, she was born in 1887. There were more rules for women than we even have now. Uranus representing who she was, but merged with Venus, tells us that she was unique, different, an outlier. You see a picture of her in the New Mexico high desert, riding a motorcycle with, a man that she's not married to. I mean, she was definitely rebelling against the culture of the time and what was expected of women. Now, I'll also mention that the ruler of the South Node is in aspect with the South Node. It's a trine, and the trine aspect represents a way that this planet thinks it's helping the person, but actually kind of keeping them in some way a little bit stuck in their South Node. So there's something about the way she rebels and is unique and different in relationship that is keeping her this outsider and keeping her maybe uh, not going for her truer emotional needs. I'll also say, in terms of her being a rebel against relationship norms at the time, was that, she was someone who was said to have had an affair with Frida Kahlo. And there's, certain evidence with their letter writing and such that they were in a strong connection for quite a few years. Now, secondary ruler of the South Node is Saturn, and Saturn in Leo is here. So Saturn represents the part of us that builds something slowly, deeply, conservatively over time. We build towards success and mastery. And in Leo, we are building something perhaps that's creative, expressive, also something that may be romantic, playful, joyful. But definitely the creativity in this chart is something that we are likely to see as a possibility. And we have that Saturn opposite the South Node at the same time as ruling it, tells us that there is something about her. Okay, so the Saturn rules her, but it also might rule others that are working against her and keeping her down here. That this is a way that maybe she stopped herself. Well, one of the things that she did is that she, was in art school and she didn't have enough money to continue, and so she became a teacher. Now, a teacher, third house, elementary school. We also might notice, just to add a little extra, Saturn rules the third house. So it's ruling who she is very strongly on this South Node level, but also ruling third house. So becoming an elementary school teacher for a number of years seemed to take her off track, seemed to be a practical, realistic issue of limitation that she made this decision that she couldn't keep on in art school as an artist. It's also true that she took up in a relationship with a married man who was in the art world, and he helped her come into her success, but he also had kind of a thwarting influence on her also. There's ways that the relationship with him was painful and held her back as well. So we see this Saturn representing what works against her. Part of it's outside of herself. Part of it relates to her and her choice to be dutiful, responsible, and take a job teaching and delay, another Saturn word, delay, but ultimately not stop her progression as an artist. But sacrificing and rationalizing her own emotional needs to have the kind of romantic, creative expression that she might have longed for with this Leo North Node. Uh, this is, what we can just begin to interpret here. I mean, we could spend an hour laying out all the possibilities of the different ways this would play out. and would play out over in many different ways in her life. For instance, ninth house, what does that mean? This is where she wants to be well regarded, well known as some kind of a teacher out in the world. It can also represent, though, with Saturn there, the difficulty in completing her art school studies. So this is again, she's longing for art school study at this high level, and practically speaking, she's having to take this job, pivot, uh, just be authentic, come up with her own art in her own way, as opposed to being, guided so much in a college type setting. So that's the planets that are ruling the nodes. We got one that aspects. If we wanted to continue with this, and there's a lot here, I don't know if I'm going to have time to play it all out. But the ascendant descendant axis squares the lunar nodes. So this is self versus other. And I'm going to make this whole stellium in Scorpio, belief, truth, and meaning that's deep and intense. Sun, the ability to make choices, to shine, to show up in a way that's intense and transformational. Emotions, seeking to have uh, love, security, uh, unconditionality, healing in this way that's deep and intense, and Mercury retrograde, her own thought process, her way of thinking of things, transformational. So she is having to embody all of this scorpionic energy to its highest level in order to come up to the North Node, to get to this place of accomplishment. Self versus other. She's going to be driven by all this Scorpio energy that is transformational, transformative, needs to be honest, maybe even ruthlessly honest, needs to face the things that scare her. It's going to take us back to Pluto, and it's in that house of relationship. So we know it's via relationship that she's coming into this sense of self that leads her to this sense of creative leadership. Okay, I'm going to say with Leo and the Saturn, the ultimate goal here is to be known in the world, to be someone that influences people's sense of truth and meaning by what she accomplishes with her own deep, intense, creative energy. So if we're talking to her and she wants to know, well, what's my path? What am I supposed to be doing here in this life? And we have, another, we won't go into a lot of details, but we have Mars, Hygeia in Virgo in a quincunx, also to the South Node. Looking at this is showing a biquintile. Um, so we have the ability to work directly with Mars energy and the healing energy of Hygeia, but it's not going to feel like it's aligning easily with the South Node qualities of freedom. There is, in the career, we can see this around the details of doing paintings that are, focused and magnified and going into the detail of the interior of a flower and how there is some kind of botany related healing process there. And yet, from those details, we then come back into the big picture of who she is as an Aquarian. Uh, the bottom line is that we're going to talk on a practical level about how relationship and coming forward with her intensity, being willing to be a woman that is not going along with the norms, not a nice woman, a woman who's deep, intense, passionate, sexual, and has a balance between self and other. This is what we are looking for, and we could go into all the ins and outs of her relationship. She ended up living with this married man. In the end, he was having affairs all the time, and she was deeply depressed and had a major mental health breakdown about that. So we could go into all those details of how that happened in her life. But the bottom line is like through the trauma and the difficulty of these relationships, she is more and more coming into her power as an artist. The emotional drama of everything she went through is probably feeding her art in ways that if she just continued to be kind of nice, rebelling a little bit, she might not have had that same experience. My second chart that I wanted to talk about today is Bruno Mars, the musician. And I would imagine that most of you would know who he is. He literally started doing like impressions and singing when he was about, 4 or 5 years old. And he has been a practicing, successful musician ever since then. And born in now 1985, he is 40 at this point, turning 41 this year, and is extraordinarily successful. So let's take a look at his nodal axis. And we come into the Scorpio here. Uh, doo, doo, doo. And just get that out of the way. South Node in Scorpio, coming into this life from lives that are deep, intense, transformative, challenging. Sometimes I would say, depending on the location of a South Node in Scorpio, person has been in lives where there's a lot of death and destruction all around them. They've really seen the worst of what humanity offers. And there is also often lives where one has been in a spiritual location as well and has spent a lot of time, meditating, trying to figure out why is life evil. So there's this back and forth between traumatic lives and deep ascetic spiritual lives. And the fact that he has Pluto on one side, definitely conjunct the South Node, and Saturn in Scorpio, not conjunct, far enough away, but they tend to work together, in my opinion. I would say both Saturn and Pluto in Scorpio are in some way either conjunct the South Node. Pluto is conjunct, representing who he was, an indication that he himself would have had a great deal of power in one of these lives. And the Saturn to me represents, because it's farther away, uh, people who were around him, people who were near him when he was in this corporate life, corporate, in this Scorpio life. And the Saturn in the ninth house represents religion, beliefs, philosophies. So I'm going to focus here a little bit more on the spiritual nature of the lives that he's coming out of, that this is what is most within him, is the memory of lives where truth and meaning were considered important. And I'm just going to check the chat box. Okay. Um, and But I also am kind of wondering as I'm looking at it, and given that he started out as a musician so early, if there's any way that we're going to be able to interpret this as him being known in some way in a more creative way. I don't really know that too much yet at this point. If I'm just looking, let's say I don't know who this person is. I would be tending to be thinking about this as past lives being part of a religion or philosophy that has lineage. Scorpio usually has that depth and that lineage. So does Pluto, so does Saturn. Saturn, where there is a great deal of focus on what is real and has excellence and has a certain structural stability in it. Now, Pluto, of course, is the ruler of Scorpio, so it just adds emphasis to that Pluto, representing more about who he was. And Mars as the uh, traditional ruler in Virgo conjunct Venus in the area of partnership suggests that when he was in, this big picture life, some kind of a teacher, and I know that as I'm talking about this, I'm putting a lot into the ninth house. And I want to point out that at 9 degrees, it's 4 degrees approximately away from this cusp. And most astrologers would move a body into the next house when it's 0 to 3 degrees away, and some 3 to 5 degrees. I'm going to, as I continue to interpret this, I'm going to include this in both houses. I feel because Saturn's here, it sort of pulls it a little bit more into the ninth, but it's legitimately also being pulled into the eighth house. Now, the eighth house adds to the trauma issue, coming out of lives where there's trauma, intensity, uh, unconscious fears and anxieties are evoked through that. And we also have the Sun and the Mercury in Libra, the sign of beauty, artistry, harmony, balance, relationship. And the reason I came back to this is because when I'm looking at Mars, the original ruler of Scorpio, and we see it's merged with Venus, and then that Venus makes us call in the Mercury and the Sun, and we end up not being able to even see this South Node by itself. We end up having to consider that who he was both in these challenging circumstances, learning spiritual truths, deeply affected by close personal relationships that are of service, that have humility, that are problem solving in some way. And then that brings us back into this situation where, excuse me, life is difficult. And he's calling on lives where maybe there was illness, deaths, losses, um, and coming forward into this life, he's coming into a Taurus North Node. And the Taurus North Node is ruled by Venus. So first of all, where is it? It's in the second house of money, resources, and self-worth. This suggests that first of all, Taurus, he must develop security and stability in this life. That is the opposite of the Scorpio, where things have been profoundly difficult in many lives, and one realizes you need to have connection to the body, to have money, to have security and stability. So that's a part of the goal. And why would it be part of the goal? Because maybe this was harder to come into in prior lives, that he was not able to have the security he wanted. Ruled, okay, Taurus ruled by Venus, Venus in the area of other people, whether it's a marriage partner or the people that he is committed to through this organizational energy, this religious foundation, not really allowing the money to be there. This is also affecting third house, communication, teaching, day-to-day life. So bringing in security and stability into the mind is an important goal state for him. One of the things that's interesting here is that the ruler of the North Node, Venus, and the ruler of the South Node, traditionally Mars, they are together. And that indicates that he has already done quite a lot of balancing in prior lives between this depth and intensity of his South Node and the goal state of the North to have financial, body, and personal security. And it's coming together in many ways through his partnered energy. Looking to see if there are planets that are square the nodes. We have a beautiful square. We have Jupiter in Aquarius in the 12th house of spirituality, Jupiter, belief, truth, and meaning in Aquarius, unique, different, breakaway, outsider, and Moon in Leo, emotions, security, nurturing in the sign of Leo, which is all about creative expression, being on stage, being a performer, connecting to this, being as unique and different as he was, and making his way to the top. And he had some setbacks. It wasn't always just a smooth goal. Um, we see here that this on again the practical level, if he's coming to you and saying, how do I accomplish my life goals? What am I here to do? You are here, you're drawing on your passion, your intensity, your sexuality, your ability to reach out to people with some kind of message, the ability to connect with partners. He has a very strong backup band group that he, has been connected to for a really long time. uh, you are bringing in all of this talent, all of this artistry, and this ability to reach the world with something meaningful, and yet at the same time make sure that you can come into a sense of self, into body, into security and safety. And what's the pathway along the way? What do you have to make sure that you're connecting to? Well, you need some time alone in retreat, just being by yourself to be authentic and clear. And you need to work really hard in ways that you love in a creative way, mm, with people that are supporting you. Remember, sixth house can be your employees or people you're mentoring or people who are mentoring you. So there's a very strong activation here. I would be checking in here relationship with mother and family. How is this going? How is it in alignment with personal truth or not? And this is like the stepping stone along the way. And you can see that this is a very tight fixed square. So working with these energies to build is something that is essence to him from the moment he was born, literally. And I can see it's going through so much time so fast. I just want to say that this birth time, 5:56 p.m., there's two birth times in Astro Data Bank. There's this one and there's 3:42 p.m. Neither one of them are top rated in terms of feeling, like rating A, where you have a birth certificate on hand, somebody has seen it. But I will say that I've chosen the 5:56 p.m. time because it gives him a Pisces rising. And he seems like a Pisces rising. He's got that kind of cute, sweet little boy look. Whereas the 3:42 would give him an Aquarius rising, which to me didn't feel as accurate. Um, I feel like I've moved through this one awfully quick. I'll be curious if you have other ideas about this chart and want to share them, once I post this, share them in the notes, or we can just talk for a moment more here. I'm going to stop the share.